Hey guys, my name's AJ and I'm here to launch my brand new channel, Manic Motorsports LLC, formerly known as Murphy's Law Auto. I got tons of new exciting content this year, including a mid-engine K-Swap CRX. We're going to take my LS Swap BMW out to the track and see what kind of performance we can get out of it. I got lots more welding, fabrication, and tuning to do, so stay tuned for all of that. But first, I'm going to launch a brand new segment on the show I'm calling Manic Motor Myths, where we talk about all sorts of common misconceptions in the car community, and we find out what's real and what's not. The first episode of that starts right now, all about cold air intake. For the first ever episode of Manic Motor Myths, we're going to go ahead and talk about cold air intake. So I thought I'd break out the old Fast and Furious shirt, because who didn't see Fast and Furious for the first time and run down to the nearest auto parts store to grab themselves a cold air intake? But how much power are you gaining? You know, back in the day, people were making ridiculous claims like 40 horsepower, 20 horsepower, even 5, honestly, seems like a lot, depending on what kind of vehicle we're talking about. But what's the reality of a cold air intake? Are you really gaining a whole lot? One of the main things that you need to consider is what factors go into a cold air intake. You want to get, obviously, cold air. Cold air is denser. Denser air has more oxygen molecules per cubic inch, which is going to equate to be more total power, more total efficiency. It's just better in every way. The cooler air charge is also better for your cylinder because it keeps your air temperature down, which keeps your cylinders and your engine from overheating. You kind of want to balance the cold air with your length of intake tube. You know, they kind of talk about a short ram intake sometimes. When they're talking about that, they're talking about a really short intake tube, which increases the efficiency of the engine. If you don't have to have the air travel a long way, there's a lot less air resistance, and that allows the engine to breathe a little easier. But if you're sucking up hot air, it might not necessarily be a benefit because you're sucking up air that's a lot less dense if it's hot. So you really want to kind of balance both those things, kind of your length of tube with your temperature of air. You want to get the coldest air possible with the shortest tube possible. Now, what other factors can go into a cold air intake? Well, turbulence is one that a lot of people don't really think about. If you've got a lot of kinks and bends and things, you're increasing the air resistance, which means your engine's going to have to work harder to pull that air into the engine, and that work is going to cost you a little bit of power. Another major factor that goes into your air intake system is going to be your air volume that you are able to push through the engine, and that's really something that's restricted by any bad part in the entire system. Let's take this straw for an example. If I blow through this straw, I can only push so much air out, right? If I put a big old tip on the end of it, still the same amount of air, right? It doesn't matter how big the tip is on this end. The volume of air that can flow is limited to the smallest part of the system, which is right here. And the same thing applies if you are trying to use it for an intake. You were to suck in through this and I were to put a big air filter on the end of this, it wouldn't matter if it was 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, 20 inches, you could make it as big as you wanted. You'd still only be able to pull this much air through it because this is the smallest part of the system. And that's how any engine works. The most restrictive part of the system is the part that's going to reduce your overall ability to make power. So if you've got a new intake, but you've got a restrictive throttle body, you can only move as much air as that throttle body, or as your intake manifold, or as your intake runners, or as your head, or as your headers, or as your muffler, or whatever piece is causing the restriction. It really doesn't matter if you put a whole new intake system on the car. If you haven't bothered to mess with the cylinder heads or the exhaust, if they don't have enough flow to support the intake that you've just added, you're not going to see any real power gain. There's no possible way for you to pull more volume of air than the most restrictive part of your system, and a lot of people tend to forget that. So people will go out and buy a cold air intake and say, oh hey, I gained 10 horsepower. Well, you got stock exhaust, so you didn't. But even if you didn't have stock exhaust, even if say you replace the intake, the throttle body, everything, then you'd be looking at getting a tune, because any little change is going to require a tune. A lot of people say, oh, I just put a cold air intake on, it doesn't need a tune. Well, the truth is that honestly, your car probably needs a tune from the factory. When they tune those things from the factory, they're tuning them for two things. They're tuning them for gas mileage, and they're tuning them for the EPA emission requirements. So they're not actually looking to get horsepower. They're not actually even necessarily looking to give you the best gas mileage. There might be a tune out there that gives you better gas mileage that just doesn't care about the EPA standards. The truth is that they're kind of doing whatever's to their benefit, not what's to your benefit. So even when you install something small, like a cold air intake, you might be changing the amount of air going in or out of that engine by just enough that you need to change the amount of fuel that you're sending at it. You might need to change the ignition timing or some other parameters that you don't have control over unless you have that kind of device installed on your vehicle. You're gonna have to take it to a professional shop and have them tune it. And the truth is if you're spending, anywhere from $50 to $300-400 on a cold air intake system, you're not gonna wanna go out and spend another $500 on a tune, because chances are you're gonna go get some headers, and then you're gonna go get some exhaust, and then you're gonna probably upgrade your ignition system. You're gonna keep adding mods, and you're not gonna wanna keep having to tune it every single time that you add an individual mod. And that's why I always recommend to people, if you're not absolutely ready to just completely modify your car and make it like a track build, make it something that you're going to tune and change and modify all the time, it might be best just not to start doing those little mods on it, because a lot of those little mods don't actually do anything without supporting mods or without a tune or without something else that actually gives you the benefit of the potential that you've just added to that motor. And a lot of people just don't want to put that investment into it, and I understand, because it's not worth it as a daily driver. But not only are you not gaining performance, you're probably actively losing performance unless you're ready to go front to back, adding some parts, a tune, and go the extra mile to make sure that you're actually getting your money's worth out of these kinds of parts. Well, that about wraps up our first episode of Manic Motor Myths, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you had any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. I would be more than happy to do a part 2 video if there's anything that I missed. And that's true of any of these Manic Motor Myths videos. I would absolutely love to do part 2s on these and some follow-up videos. I got a lot more exciting content, guys, so be sure to stay tuned for that. If you like what you saw, like and subscribe for more, guys. Thanks for watching.